Boys, I don't know if y'all knew this, but just what I came to say to the fire.
My mom passed away, and we actually buried her on Sunday. But what you didn't know was that her pallbearers were all firefighters. They picked her off the floor so many times when she fell that they carried her this last time. So, thank you.
Well, I'll give you a little bit about my background. I was born in Garland County. My family's actually been in Garland County since about 1906. We came from Trestwood. They were all sharecroppers and came to Hot Springs to try and get a job on the railroad. And my great-grandfather did not actually get a job on the railroad. However, his progeny did. My great-grandfather, he did not have the ability to read. He became a carpenter. And then, his son actually got a job on the railroad, the first one that ever did it. You don't know at that point in time, a railroad job was really the job to have. It didn't matter whether you were a laborer, or whether you were a manager, or whatever, the railroads paid the most money. Well, in legal avocations in Hot Springs and Garland County, anyway, it paid the most money. So anyway, as I said, the first one in my family that could actually really read was my grandfather. The males, the females could, the males could not. It's kind of a weird deal. His father saw him to get to the point where he got through the 8th grade, and he made sure my dad got through high school, and my dad made sure I got a college education. And I telling my children, we'll work with you to help you get a master's degree. Each generation should help the generation that follows it. And so it's pretty important, to my family that we follow those lines. Although in many instances, raising teenagers, there's a lot of differences, and in many types of situations, they make determinations on their own on what they're going to do. But, the offer's still there, let's just put it that way. I'm married to Regina Killingsworth, and she's a pharmacist here in Hot Springs at Walmart on Central. Some of you probably know her, some of it. If you don't, you should stop by and see her. She's a really good gal. I've been in the fire service for 25 years. Well, actually, that's not true. I've actually been in the fire service since 1986. I started as a volunteer in Morning Star Fire Department, joined Hot Springs Fire Department in 1989. Rose to the rank of fire marshal 5 years later, which that was a pretty big move. But I've been preparing myself for it all along. That's what I wanted to do. That was my choice, the thing that I wanted to accomplish. And then ultimately, 10 years ago, I became a fire chief. So anyway, that's my background. Kind of give you an idea of where I was at and what I was doing. One of the first things that happened to me when I became the fire marshal of Hot Springs is Orville Sanders, the fire chief who preceded me, came in and had a meeting with me. And he said, Ed, at some point in time in your career, you're going to have to deal with these buildings downtown because of the poor condition of them. And, it was a deal to where that there was a lot of political pressure to not enforce the codes in downtown Hot Springs because those codes had not been enforced. In fact, there was actually a ordinance on the book that actually kept the fire code from being fully enforced in those buildings. Recently, we got that ordinance repealed, and as far as commercial buildings, and began the process of implementing what we refer to as the Thermal Basin Fire District. And the Thermal Basin Fire District was just a means in a certain area of the city, a geographic area, which is downtown, the oldest sections of the city, to allow us to apply what's referred to as the existing building code over the state building code whenever there are issues with the building that have to be repaired. Normally, in a building like this, if I come into it and I see a breach in a wall, or I see a situation to where that fire sprinkler system has been disabled, or say that there is a huge fissure that is developing in the foundation, you would apply the building code to that. I would call the building department. The building department would come into it with us, and we would deal with the issue together. Under what's referred to as the existing building code, it gives the property owner a lot of latitude. In other words, you don't have to do everything that the building code says. You're giving certain license because it is a building that was in existence prior to the adoption of the code, or a building that is in historic condition. You're allowed to do certain things to make the building safe, and then your responsibility from that point onward is over. And it's very, very helpful in dealing with old and historic buildings. And we have a lot of buildings in downtown Hot Springs that date back to the early 1900s, some back to the 1890s. And so we really needed a different means to be able to deal with those structural issues, penetration issues, and things like that occurred through those buildings through the years. So that's where we got to where we are today, as far as like dealing with those buildings downtown in the Thermal Basin Fire District. It was just a means that I identified that would be, the easiest way to help bring those buildings back into some kind of compliance with the codes. Okay, I'll give you my synopsis on it.
What's the possibility of bringing these back?
Oh, it is excellent. Because what the existing building code gives me the ability to do is if you can establish proper means of egress and put a fire sprinkler system in any of those buildings, they can be reoccupied. It gives incredible latitude to do that. And, I think we're gonna see a lot of different changes to many of those buildings. And I've had different people have the misconception that we are forcing people to occupy the buildings. We're not. The fire code just says the building has to be safe. The existing building code gives us the ability to make the building safe by two things: having proper means of egress, in other words, proper number of exits and a proper way to get to it, and adding a fire sprinkler system. It doesn't say you have to come back and have separation of all of the tenant spaces, proper separation. It doesn't say that you have to have proper separation from floor to ceiling in the multi-story buildings. It's saying do the best you can, and then you've done your part. And that's what the existing building code is all about. And, there are other buildings in Hot Springs we're going to apply it to. There are some over on Hobson. There are some on Albert Pike that need to be dealt with and to be made as safe as they possibly can. And we have some buildings that are, more than 100 years old that have always been safe. And we left those buildings alone. If existing conditions dictate that a door cannot be 3 foot wide, and say the door can be 2 foot 8 inches wide, well, we're going to work with that property owner to allow them to keep that door. If that property owner is doing the things that are necessary to keep the building safe. And if they've always kept the building safe and we've never had any problems with them, we've left those people alone. If you go downtown, you can go in some of those buildings that are immaculate. Just have been well cared for, have always had proper means of egress, have not blocked those doors, have not done things that would cause a greater fire hazard than one would expect for a building like that. Then the fire department has left those buildings alone. Yes, ma'am.
Does the Army, Navy, or the rehab center, does it have sprinklers on every floor?
That is a wonderful question. We about
Why do you think so?
about 4 years ago, we began the process of working with the state of Arkansas to bring those buildings back into compliance with their own fire code.
So they're not in compliance.
They're in the process of being compliant. What they did was they came in and they installed all new fire mains, new fire hydrants, and began the process of laying out sprinkler systems for the multifamily residential area, in other words, the dormitories, and also for the main building. Within the next few years, they will have both of those buildings entirely sprinkled. Yes, ma'am.
What about the buildings in the back? They look like they're not being kept up.
Yes, ma'am. Most of those buildings are 2-story, and we have not addressed the 2 stories downtown yet, so we're not addressing those 2 stories yet.
Okay, just one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
If you have a building that's 5 or 6 stories tall,
Yes, ma'am.
and only the bottom floor is being used, do all 6 floors have to have a sprinkler system in them in order to pass your inspection?
That's a great question. If you have different options to make your building safe. If you can make your building safe without a fire sprinkler system, then you don't have to have a fire sprinkler system.
Is there a way to do that?
There is, but it's highly expensive.
More expensive than putting in a sprinkler system.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Very expensive.
Ma'am, to try and get proper floor separation and proper tenant separation in those buildings, you would spend an incredible amount of money. And in certain instances, you would spend that money and still have to sprinkle the building. So we're telling people the cheapest way to do it is to put the sprinkler system in and do the means of egress and just be done with it.
So if they can't afford $200,000 to put sprinkler systems in all of the floors, their other option is to be condemned or to sell it. Is that correct?
The fire department is not telling anyone they have to sell a building. The fire department is just telling you you have to bring it up to a certain code. How you deal with that is the property owner's business. It is a situation to where that we have had a couple of the buildings that have sold, but more than, I would say probably in about 80% of the cases, the property owner is doing the things necessary to bring the building into compliance.
What about the Majestic? I mean, it's such a mess right now, and I know that there's a lot of problems in getting it completely torn down and what is, but that's an see a lot of people around that area all the time. Where are you on that, and what is the, upcoming thing, the next thing that's supposed to happen with the Majestic?
That's a great question also. The Majestic is an eyesore, and it is a huge problem. It is probably the greatest challenge that we face in downtown Hot Springs right now. I was in contact with Chad Peckron, who is the attorney for Mr. Hassenflue, who owns the building yesterday, and got a call from Bruce Maxwell today, the person that actually manages the property for Mr. Hassenflue. We've got permission from him to put people back in the building to do another evaluation of the structure. You have to give people due process. And I know everyone wants a solution to that building and that problem. But I, as a code official and as a life safety official, I cannot force that man to do what he needs to do. The state of Arkansas can. I can write tickets. We can take him to court, which we do, and which we will continue to do in the future. At the same time, though, there are certain rights that he is guaranteed, and I'm not going to do anything to violate those rights. Now, I'm going to advocate, and we're going to write citations like we have in the past, and do everything we can to bring about a positive end to that. But ultimately, either the state of Arkansas is going to have to move on it and force him to do something with it, or the city of Hot Springs or Garland County is going to have to take the property and clean it up. And that's really the bottom line.
And that's probably what's going to happen.
Yes, ma'am, I would imagine you're right.
Chief,
Yes, sir.
you said Garland County's gonna have to take it to clean it up?
No,
What
I
do you mean
said,
by that?
the option would be for the city of Hot Springs or Garland County to clean it up. Both are governmental entities that would have the ability to do that under Arkansas law if they chose to.
Hey,
Chief.
Yes, ma'am.
sorry, Chief. So, can we light a fire under the Chamber of Commerce to kind of come make through with the promises they promised, like December 17th? Remember, I touched on this before. Is there anybody who can light a fire under the Chamber to kind of fulfill those promises they made to these downtown owners with the fire issue? Who do we talk to?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I couldn't hear. Let me bring you the mic.
I said, is there anyone who can light a fire under the chamber to fulfill these promises they started, on December 17th, December 17th, we've touched on this before, but, who do we talk to the chamber to kind of get them to fulfill their promises about helping find grants and telling these people that are downtown owners that they're going to be behind them and help them? Who do we talk to about that?
Well, Jim Fram is the director of the Chamber of Commerce in the Metro Partnership. One of the issues that we found, he would be the one you need to talk to. One of the issues that we found out on these buildings, and I'm going to talk to Jim for just a second because I didn't realize it when they first began it, is that no bank will give you a loan on a building unless you have a business plan. In other words, you have to have a plan for what you're going to do with the building, how you're going to use the money, how you intend to recoup the money to pay it off. And if you don't have a business plan, they're not going to even look at you as giving a grant.
Did the chamber know this when they offered?
I don't know. I don't know at all. I can tell you that's the thing that that I found out through the process of it. So you'd have to talk to Jim about that, but I do know that's true. You have to have a business plan. Now you can go to West Central Arkansas Planning and Development. They are the small business loan entity in this area, and they can give you some ways to help you put together a plan. But ultimately, the person is the one that has to put together the plan to be able to get loans on anything. Any type of small business that you put together, whatever you're wanting to use the money for, you have to have a plan for it. Sure.
I want to offer that I spoke with the chamber extensively. Cole McCaskill's a young man at the chamber, and his statement was very specific. He says, we haven't found any money, we don't have any grants, we don't see any state, we don't see any federal. That's essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, because of the absence of economic viability for the buildings. They cannot make a building business plan that at this time will pay for the renovations of all those upper floors. Chief, I agree with what you're saying about making them safe, but they can't make a business plan that makes them useful. And until there's a return on the investment and the profit and cash flow generated to pay for the building being upgraded. It's just a white elephant in the boat anchor. And the chamber went out and said that, but even the ones that have been sold, the Dugan Stewart building, the Thompson building, the only money that's changed hands unless they've made their second payment to Wheatley has been $100,000. And they missed the grant cycle, and they missed the tax credit cycle, and it won't come up again until the first quarter of next year. So they're working on the first floors, and the chief is working with them to allow them to do the things that they can to occupy and use that. But they don't have the money to move forward with the boutique hotels, and I remind everyone, there's no lease yet on the bathhouse for McCabe. Thank you.
The one thing that I will tell you though is that the grant cycle and the tax credit cycle does come out, as he says, at the first of the year. And I do know that those are available to people that want to pursue them. It just all depends on what you want to do, but you do have to have the business plan to make that occur. I know that from what I'm going to have to echo something that he said, from what I do understand that, you know, any of the historic buildings are available for the tax credits. And the tax credits are the thing that have driven redevelopment in most places.
25%.
Yes, ma'am.
It makes sense. It makes perfect sense when you have a business plan before you go get a loan. However, that being said, if the second, third, fourth, fifth floors of these buildings are not safe and they don't meet fire code, how are they going to get that loan? If I go to get a mortgage, I have to have my prospective property inspected, and it has to meet certain codes, and it has to be safe, or the bank's not going to give you a mortgage.
That's a great question. That's the reason why we set the Thermal Basin Fire District up in a series of steps. The first step is getting the riser in for the fire sprinkler system and meeting the means of egress for the first floor. The second step is putting a fire sprinkler system into the first floor. The next step is putting a fire sprinkler system and means of egress on the second floor. These are done in 6-month increments, little at a time.
So they can make enough money on it. It's kind of like making enough money on your first floor to progress to the second floor, make enough money on that to progress.
Yes, ma'am.
And can they get extensions on that if they're close? But not-
Absolutely. In fact, we had a building that changed hands not too long ago that we were headed towards, well, it would be actually the fourth legal challenge that we had. We won the first 3, and the property owner decided he wanted to sell instead of fixing the building. He sold it to a gentleman in Jessieville. That gentleman called us and asked us, can I get an extension? I said, absolutely. You know, we'll start the clock over on you.
So you do work well with people, then that's good.
Yes, ma'am. We're, you know, no one is meeting the, well, that's not true. Most of the people are working towards meeting the first set of goals. Some have already met them, some of them are in the process. I have 2 property owners who have not done anything. They're the ones that are going to be facing legal action. So it is a deal to where that if you're working, trying to meet the goals, we're going to be there right with you, holding your hand and helping you. Yes, sir.
Could you describe what would happen if there were a major fire?
Well, boy, down there, I hate that question.
Great question.
Downtown Hot Springs is in many cases built to burn. You have a mix of wood frame structures along with masonry structures. And so what you would have is you have a hodgepodge of what could be, what in old days we would call a conflagration district, because you have 0 lot lines with common walls between buildings, but over the years those walls have, either through just age or by actions of property owners, have been penetrated and breached. And so in some cases you can reestablish that rating between those 4-hour rating between those buildings. In some cases that 4-hour rating was never there, because in 1890 there was nothing in the codes that said you had to have a certain level of separation between buildings. And so in some of those instances, we would actually see fire going from building to building. The problem on one of the issues we've had in the past is roofs being set alight by embers coming down from fires that are burning down the block. That's less today because we're really encouraging property owners to go with a polymer roof, and it will melt, but it will not actually burn. If you go over to the building just to the northeast of the Majestic, what used to be the Royal Vista, that building had a lot of burns on its roof, but the roof did not catch on fire. And that was due to two things. One, it was due to the fact that a device from the aerial was spraying on it, but more so because it has a polymer roof on it. And the polymer would melt, but it would not actually sustain combustion. So we're encouraging everyone to go with that to take care of the roof issue. We're also, the fire department is also getting the common basements closed up. In many instances in the past, up until the last few years, you could actually go from building to building in downtown Hot Springs via the basements. Well, fire could travel the exact same way. So we're getting those closed off and getting them rated off the way they should be to help keep fire from occurring down there. In the southwest of the thermal basin, in other words, that Park Avenue and that Prospect area, you still have a big issue as far as the number of wood frame buildings on the south slope of a hill. South slopes of hills in Arkansas are the things that burn vehemently. Why? Because you have the southwest wind during the dry season that always comes through there, and you have the most sun is going to hit that south slope. And so you still have a conflagration issue in that Quapaw Prospect area that we're going to have to deal with at some point in time. We've been very lucky in Hot Springs in the last few years. The last 50, 75 years, we've dealt with the large fires fairly effectively. But that does not mean that we are immune to having a large fire occur in our urban area. We're not. We do the best we can to manage it, but that is, I would be just a stone cold liar if I told you that possibility had been eliminated. It's not.
Chief,
Yes, sir.
are any of these buildings under the Homestead?
The homestead tax credit?
No, under the Homestead Act where they don't have to comply if they've lived there so long.
No, sir.
Do you
No,
believe
sir.
it?
But most of the property has changed hands so many different times in those areas that that would not be an issue that would come up. Yes, sir.
Since it is private property
Uh-huh.
and they do own it, you believe in property rights, I'm sure.
I do. That's why the fire department does not go inside single-family dwellings.
Okay, well, property rights, is it distinguished between homes, private and business?
Huge difference. A business is a public entity, open for people to come in and out of.
Even though they're owned, don't you think we ought to pass a bond or something since the government requires? And I understand about the fire sprinkler system. I understand about that, but don't you think since they're required to do it and it's privately owned property, that we ought to pass a bond or let the government pay for that improvement if they want it instead of forcing on somebody with fines attached to it?
You can always put together an improvement district in an area. In fact, we're putting together an improvement district in the neighborhood that I live in, because I live in an area that the roads are not maintained by the county. We maintain our own roads. It is a thing to where that I believe in taking care of whatever amenities that I personally want, and I believe in improvement districts. And I think if they decided to form an improvement district downtown to put fire sprinkler systems in, that's a legal option if that's what they chose to do.
Have you heard the next thing on require besides the fire sprinkler systems are going to require the removal of asbestos in all the buildings? Have you heard that?
I have not heard that. Now, I can tell you that in the areas of the buildings that are being remodeled, asbestos is being removed, but there is no, to my knowledge, there's no act or requirement that is about to take place to force people to remove asbestos.
Do you think that'll take place in the future?
I think asbestos is a real threat. I mean, in many instances, especially where we've been fighting over fires, you find out afterwards that there was a significant amount of asbestos inside the building, and that's not a good thing. It's just like lead paint and mercury. We don't think that you have lead poisoning in a lot of these buildings. You do. There's a lot of lead paint that needs to be removed. There's a lot of mercury that needs to be dealt with. There are many things out there that are harmful to people, and asbestos is one of them, especially in a situation where it becomes friable. That means that it can float off in air. That means you can be walking down the street, and it could be something that affected you. Yes, sir.
Now, I've got a little pun. When are they going to put a roof over to protect from meteors?
I don't know. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to protect from fire. So that's what I do. Yes, sir.
Chief, to some things that I've observed you speak about in the last couple of years, and then an issue that came up last night at the city meeting. The city meeting, they adopted a new code that apartments, condos, et cetera, all have to have more than one means of egress.
Yes, sir.
Now, I'm concerned about that because I know there's a lot of apartments built back to back. There's a lot of condos built back to back. The second part of that was that if you had a window 20 inches. But we have multi-story, two-story, I'm going to say. I don't know of any three. They only have one means of access and egress all over this city, apartments in that. Now, we just put that in the code. How is that enforceable? I know in your fire codes you have many things grandfathered in, but the city didn't put that in there. They just said you must have two means of egress. Now, and you're aware of Whispering Pines condominium. I can name a lot of apartment complexes. The way they're built, there's no way to have a second means of egress. There's another unit solid behind that. What are we going to do? How do you envision that?
Well, that's a great question. You know, if you go back and you look at, say, the apartment houses on Prospect and Crawford, many of those we have found in the past have actually had a second means of egress, but the property owners have determined to tear the stairway out. So we are making them reestablish it in those instances where the second means of egress was actually in use and actually present.
Okay, but I'm not speaking of those where you can walk out into a hall and go this way. I'm speaking of a property that's built with one door in. That's all. There's a unit on the sides, or it's solid in the sides. There's a unit behind it, or it's on a second floor, and we may consider, I know some second floors have balconies, but you could take people off there, and that may satisfy your all's requirement. But I'm talking about the apartments that have been built with one door.
You're talking about those that open to the outside?
They open only to the
Yeah,
outside.
the code already addresses that, and it says that certain areas can have a dead end of 20 feet and nothing more than that, unless you have a sprinklered building. So if you're dead end on, say, your apartment where you walk out to the exterior is more than 20 feet, where you can touch a stair, then you do need, even by the existing code, you need a second means of egress.
You can, on the ground floor level, you can walk right out to the yard, but it only has one door.
But
That's
that's your means of egress. You count from where your apartment starts to when you step on a stair. And so if you've got 20 feet, in other words, if you come out of your apartment and you don't have any other exit but one exit, you can go 20 feet until you need to be stepping on a stair for an exit.
Or you're outside.
Yeah. And so
And it doesn't matter how big the apartment is. It could be 2,000 square feet with one door, as long as you have one door.
I would not recommend that.
Well, they're about 1,500 square feet that way in the house.
And there are threshold sizes on buildings, on apartments, that dictate that you'd have more than one.
Right.
So,
But any that were built prior to those would be grandfathered.
it depends upon the size of it. It depends upon the size.
I mean, I can see pulling renovation that there would be no way for them to do it without just destroying the building.
But most modern construction, because architects put their seal on it and they're liable for it, meets the means of egress code, meets the life safety code. That's why you have an architect. And we tell people, an architect is the most important thing you can do when you're doing a building project, because that person is certifying this is safe. In other words, you know you're meeting the codes at that time. Yes, ma'am?
Well, I didn't hear George's, keep it to the end of George's question, but an apartment that has a doorway going into a breezeway, and then a sliding glass door, but when you get onto that little patio, there is that high railing that comes up to about here. So I lived in one of those rear, and I was walking when I moved in. There's fire. I can't get over that railing.
Yes,
So how does it meet code?
Well, you have a right to live wherever you want to live. And that's one of the things that I tell people. If you have limited mobility, I would tell you the best thing for you to do is move to a ground floor. But you have a right to live where you want to live. Now, does that mean that it's going to be more problematic in a rescue and a fire? A little bit, yeah. Not so much that it can't be overcome, but it is more problematic. It is more difficult to deal with. Now, we have some folks that live on top of the high-rise that have very limited mobility, but they like the view up there. And so, you know, they certainly have a right to live there.
Well, this is ground floor.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am?
Just out of curiosity, is this a Bass's Hotel or the one next to,
The one on Malvern, the Woodman Building? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know, the big hotel, it used to be the Black Hotel?
Yes, ma'am, the Woodman Building.
Okay. Does it have sprinklers on all the floors?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
And who put it there?
The property owner.
The government or the city or?
No, it's a private sector gentleman who owns it. In fact, there's been 2 owners of it.
And that was done with tax credits.
It was done with the tax credits.
25%.
Yeah, the 25% tax credits were used to finance that building, part of it anyway. Through the model.
Chief, it was grandfather instead of homestead. I said homestead, it was his grandfather.
Jack, I have one more question.
Okay. You've done pretty benign, haven't you?
I have, you guys are treating me well.
I can focus.
Yeah, you're good.
One more question. Now you get attacked. Now go.
I'm not going to attack the chief because I find myself usually on the page with him. But Chief, I'm going to quote you. A few years ago, in the discussions about annexation, you made a comment that if you're not growing, you're stagnating. And at that time, I believe it was in reference to annexation and how we're going. You, since that time, have spoken more than once about the ability or the limitations that your department has due to equipment, personnel, locations of firehouses, etc. Would you comment for us briefly to finish off here what you see going forward? I mean, I myself and most of this group, we're opposing annexation because it's a money grab by the city. Now, at the same time, I want your group to have the best and be able to fight the fires and protect the citizens. But you said there was a train wreck coming. I'm on your page. And we're stagnating. I'll agree, but I think we're stagnating because of city policies. But I just would like to get your input. Thank you.
Yeah, the train wreck I was referring to was a lack of growth inside the city. It is something that I think that does have to be addressed. As far as annexation, Hot Springs Fire Department under its current resources, the city could annex out to Majestic Lodge Road on 70 West. You could go to Piney Junction on 270 West. You could actually take in the north shore of Lake Hamilton without losing your ISO 2. When you begin to cross Lake Hamilton in any meaningful, large-scale area, especially to the south, it would be much more difficult. But there are certain things that the city could do as far as annexation that would allow it to grow if that's what the voters chose to do.